And so I've heard you mention philosophy there several times, and you and I, of
Yes.
course, know what that is. But for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, maybe you could just explain generally what you mean by philosophy. Some people think that a philosophy is just, well, this is my philosophy, meaning, I wake up every
Yes.
day and exercise and eat breakfast. That's my philosophy. And
No,
so maybe if you
yeah.
maybe if you could just explain, tease that out just a little bit,
Yeah,
what you
of
mean by
course.
that. Yeah.
You know, I think students of philosophy over the years have discovered that it's a lot easier to become aware of what it is, having done it for
Right.
a little bit at least, and then look back on. But it almost never is easy to give a succinct definition. But I like what Ed Miller was at University of Colorado Boulder. I think he was a Christian. He was basically the philosopher there. And I used his textbook called Questions That Matter. When I was a graduate student at Ole Miss, and you know, people may or may not know that oftentimes, if you're working on a graduate or a doctorate, that you can teach courses, say at the undergraduate level in your area, and that's sort of like a financial aid kind of package. You know, you get your tuition waiver, and you get a stipend, and it really is helpful to kind of be trying to teach this stuff at a couple of steps down from what you're learning it. That's a good experience to try to see how to shoehorn it into somebody who's not in a graduate level or a doctoral level. And so Ed Miller basically defines philosophy as thinking rationally and critically about life's most important questions.
Mm.
And then he unpacks each of those words. Rationally would be in opposition to, say, an undue emotion, where we know a lot, especially as Americans, we know how much emotions can drive the narrative and the debate, especially in politics. People get passionate about their views, and sometimes emotions can run roughshod over sound principles of reason and logic and evidence and things like that. So philosophy's going to want to be rational, and of course, that's not unique to philosophy. Any academic discipline would want to be rational. You're not going to do medicine and then be contradictory or indifferent to the evidence and the arguments about a particular medical procedure. So, of course, that's not unique. And then critically, and that's kind of that word's kind of fallen into disrepute with critical theory and critical race theory, these kind of things. And we even in English, don't we use it almost as a bad thing? Well, he's a very
Mm.
critical person,
Right.
right?
Right.
Meaning you're always finding what's wrong with everybody, and you're always voicing your opinions about what's wrong with everything around you and stuff. But in this context, critical just means subjecting something to a legitimate critique. That is to say, there are things that we cherish as human beings. We'll get into some of those that sometimes warrant a certain level of critique as to whether our orientations regarding those things is actually on track and actually true or not. And so, being willing to do that um, it kind of falls under the purview. Now, there's one caveat to all this. I think you and I are in solidarity on this, but most philosophers with whom I'm familiar, I shouldn't say most, many with whom I'm familiar, wouldn't be so sympathetic to our opinions. And that's this, that there had been a tendency, especially rising in the 20th century, to relegate philosophy as just a sort of a housekeeping discipline.
Right.
It's just a way other disciplines learn how to manage their glossaries and their borders and their categories and their logic and the way they do whatever they're doing, physics
Hmm.
or chemistry or history, whatever. But the philosopher himself, according to this view, didn't really have any content to bring to the table. He's just more or
Right.
less the housekeeper of it, what they call a second order discipline. It just deals with other disciplines. But in the classical tradition that we celebrate at Southern Evangelical Seminary, meaning this tradition arising out of the ancient Greeks, imbibed by the church fathers, guiding guiding theological thinking and development through the history of the Western Christianity, certainly, finding its zenith in the Middle Ages. That tradition says there are actual truths about reality that the philosopher is uniquely equipped to address. And so what I think we'll discover in our conversation is some of those truths spill over into everything else that we think and do as human beings,
Right.
everything.
Right.
So that in a sense, the philosopher ends up being at a very critical point of critique, if you will, because so many different things we do and say as humans involves the categories, methods, data points, content, whatever of philosophy. Now, since that's so broad and disparate, you can pick out different things that the philosopher may deal with that seem so different from each other. It's hard to again give that one label to it. But here's a definition I heard. Somebody said, "Well, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit." Okay, so I don't remember where I was when I learned that actually a tomato is not a vegetable; it's a fruit.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
wisdom is knowing not to put tomatoes in a fruit salad. Okay,
Right.
right. So you don't want to do that. Is wisdom. So then
Right.
philosophy is wondering whether that makes ketchup a smoothie or not. Because technically you say,
Right.
well, if tomatoes are fruit, it seemed like ketchup would be a smooth stuff. So if
Right.
those kind of questions, really hook you, then you're probably a philosopher at
Right.
heart.